Hello. So, welcome. I actually just want to kick into this. So I'm not going to discuss this. There's some intro slides. If you want, you can pause. There's some spelling mistakes anyway, which is typical of me. So this was supposed to be the first video. So we're basically on a big series called The Big Lie, and we're basically doing two things. So we're digging down into biblical truth, and we're trying to look honestly at the facts about some of the lies that are being perpetuated in our culture today, just in the world. I just thought this would be an interesting thing to look at. Now, before you switch off, so this is basically what I've done. So I'll explain why in a minute. It's in the slides. You can pause them. But we're going to look basically at the court cases, particularly Trump and in other cases, other relevant court cases about electoral law, what's happened. We're only interested in those. So we're not even trying to answer the question, is Trump right or wrong? It's, at this point, don't care. I'm not saying whether you care or not is not important. I'm saying at this point, the only thing that's important is the evidence. Actually, we get that answer from the evidence. So we're looking at the actual court cases. And I think this is kind of interesting, given that the elections a year ago, there's been like almost no reporting, no coverage on actually what was said in the court cases and what the judges decided. And it's this whole idea of no evidence. So what really sparked it off for me, I mean, you can see it in the slides, they're a bit waffly because I'm waffly. So I'll just keep it simple. So I was watching on the news and everyone just said no evidence. And I'm like, there's something not right about every media outlet saying, and honestly, I think they're all biased against Trump anyway. That's just what they're going to report. But they're all using the same language, not just the same language, not just saying the same thing. They're using the exact two-word phrase, no evidence. I'm like, well, it triggered this idea of, is there actually all evidence? And where do I find that? Well, obviously, it's in the court cases. Now, I know because this is kind of my line of work. It's really hard to find stuff on the internet, but my job is to kind of hunt down stuff on the internet and find it, and particularly find it through certain sources. I'm very good at finding it through certain sources because that's part of my job. I won't explain that. So I was like, I could easily find that. So why don't I try and find it? So I did, and it's like, I found loads of stuff here. Why don't I review it and make up my own mind, and then why don't I make a video out of this? So this is back in February 2021. And I sat on this for ages and ages and ages and ages. It's part of what inspired me to do this series that I won't talk about. So this is the process as I saw it, which we're not going to discuss. If you want to read that, pause it. So these are some of the issues. So there are further issues, and actually the reality for me is this is such a hot potato. Let's keep it simply looking at the evidence. This is my process. So hunt down the actual court documents, read them, see what they say. Again, so I hope that was quick for you. So this is Wisconsin. So what we're going to do is look at each number of court cases, whether it has one or more in each state. So this is the Wisconsin video, and yes, I can't spell Wisconsin. So this kind of, we are looking at the evidence. This is proven. So this is the opening, I don't know what you would call it in legal terminology. This is the opening page. So it's the official document. So you can see certain things. The court information, the dates, and the case. So this is just the opening slide for each video, for each state, just saying this is the opening document. It sort of certifies the information we're going to look at. It's official. Now, I think if you wanted to dig down and dive, you could find the same document. I'm not going to do anything in terms of telling you how to do that. I think some of them are starting to disappear. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong in that. But you should be able to find any court document online after it's been decided, after the court case has ended. So anyway, if you want to do that, you can do that. But anyway, the point is just to prove this is official. So this is the point. So that's a bit small. So basically, you can read that. It says that there's 4 issues that are not the defence, the opposite of the defence. In this case, Trump's for alleging. So about something to do with absentee ballots. Well, we can say it generically and say it doesn't really matter what it is because we're actually going to look at it. So requests to do absentee ballots, polling clerks and them filing missing information, ballots marked indefinitely confined, which is a kind of legalese, and there's votes cast in a democracy in the park event. So that's the bit in the document, just as that. And the large bit at the bottom about democracy in the park. So in this case, those are the 4 issues. So this is part of the process of any election. It's actually the law that dictates that process. So how a ballot should be filled in, what can be done to rectify a ballot, if it's not valid, ultimately if a ballot should be counted or not. This is all based actually on state law. So this is something if you are particularly outside America, but even if you're American, may not be aware of. So it's not like there's this presidential election and the election rules are always the same. Actually, the point is they slightly differ anyway due to what state you're voting in, which is a bit weird. I find the whole thing weird. It's very American because in America, legally, the power resides with the states, not the government, ironically. And that's one of the reasons that makes America great, I'd say, if you believe that or not. I really think that's right or not. But for those who believe it's great, it's like the kind of bureaucracy of the oversight of the government is minimal, or should be minimal. But anyway, an election in each state is run by its own electoral commission. Here it's the Wisconsin Electoral Commission, which is shortened to WEC. You see that information from the document there. So here the case is not thrown out, it's thrown out. So this is the whole idea of no evidence. It doesn't mean there is no evidence. It just means there's no evidence legally. So what we find with this is that the case is thrown out, but it's not on the law on elections, it's on the law on a time technicality. And what happens is some judges in this court case actually disagree. So there's more than one judge, and they give what's called a dissenting view to the majority opinion. So the majority opinion throughout Trump's case, but there are some judges that say no, I disagree. It's a typical way for some. I mean, I wouldn't actually know, but some court cases to be resolved, particularly in America. I think this is more usual, particularly on higher, more important matters like this, where things go to a higher court. In this case, state court, or you've got the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, same system, multiple judges. So I think there's 9 judges. So I presume, I mean, I wouldn't know there's 9. But anyway, if we just read some of the content. So this is content again from the actual court case. Some of the respondents have suggested that WEC, which is again the Wisconsin Electoral Commission, has been advising clerks to add missing information to ballot envelopes for years. So the voters should not be punished for following WEC's advice. They make similar claims for the collection of votes more than 40 days before the November the 3rd election. So this is part of the court case. So this is kind of saying really the defence and the prosecution, that's the word I was looking for, agree that this actually did happen. The point is why it happened, and was it illegal, and what's the precedent? So precedent's really important in law, because it's like, this is the law, this is what happened in previous cases, that's the precedent. Now, sometimes something happens and say, well, no, something comes along and they say, no, this, we're going to change that precedent, and then that court case becomes the thing that's quoted in the documents like these and in the court case for future court cases. So it's almost like, if that say what's happened here, which obviously it won't, to say, well, this was the case, but then there was this court case here, and they give the number, so that changed the guidelines on the law and actually changed the law, so this is now the precedent. So it's a big difference between what we think is legally correct and morally correct. They can be very different. Doesn't mean they have to be, but actually the two things are not the same. So back to the document. If WC has been giving advice contrary to statute, those acts do not make the advice lawful. So this is another part. WC must follow the law. So basically it's the idea actually that the law actually here was broken. So we kind of covered that a bit. So there are multiple issues with these court cases. As we just said, there's a difference between what we think is morally right and legally right. But actually, what's legally right is the actual law and whether it's broken. So in this case, the law was broken. We as a law declaring court owe it to the public to declare whether WC's advice is incorrect. However, doing so does not necessarily lead to striking absentee ballots that were cast by following incorrect WC advice. The remedy petitions seek may be out of reach for a number of reasons. So straight away we got to this point, okay? Rewind, retrack. So this is going to be a long process, which is why we're breaking it down state by state. But the point is, Trump made these allegations. Everyone just assumes he's in that case. Everyone assumes he is incorrect. To the point that on all the news channels, everyone says there's no evidence. Well, already we found out that's not the case. So the Aussie point is, well, there is no evidence because all these court cases have been thrown out as being ridiculous. Well, did they say they were ridiculous in the court case? Well, don't know. Well, they were thrown out. They'd say, well, why were they thrown out? Well, we don't know because no one reported on them. So this is the point. What Trump wants in prosecuting in this case is for the result to be changed because this happened. So the court is saying, yes, we agree this happened, but the remedy you seek as a petitioner may be out of reach for a number of reasons. You're right, but we can't change the result. It's basically what they're saying. So we'll try and just stick to the court cases and not my bullet points. So if WC has been given, so this again is the document. If WC has been given, again, the Wisconsin Electoral Commission giving advice contrary to statute, these acts do not make the advice lawful. That's simply saying, well, we discussed they've broken the law, they gave this advice, that advice is not lawful. Next, they must follow the law. We as a law declaring court owe it to the public to declare whether WC's advice is incorrect. Pretty black and white issue. However, doing so does not necessarily lead to striking absentee ballots that were cast by following incorrect WC advice. The remedy petition seek may be out of reach for a number of reasons. So I'm not sure if that's exactly the same actually, or from the previous slide. But it's again the same thing. So the real point is, there's a petition Trump makes to get the result changed. Why? Because in this instance, so there are four issues. For this instant and this issue, the people running the election broke the law by giving incorrect illegal advice. But the issue then is, okay, if we try and correct those ballots, how many ballots were sent out? And this is the point really. Unless the system's actually systemized, so to speak, to be able to rectify that afterwards. It's the only way to change that, because it's the only way of knowing actually how many, and it's not part of the system. So they can't retrospectively go back and look at the ballots at all. So they just don't know. So that's one of the key issues here. Procedures by which Wisconsin elections are conducted must be fair to all voters. This is an important election, but it's not the last election in which WEC will be giving advice. If we do not shoulder our responsibility, we leave future elections to flounder and potentially result in the public's perception that in Wisconsin elections are unfair. Now, that's important. So we've got this kind of idea in our culture that certain people are mentally deranged or unstable, depending on what their political affiliation is. So one of the ideas of the election is still there's a huge number of people in America who do not agree that the election was fair or that the result was correct. It's something like 50-50, and it's been that way for ages, and it's not changed. So the point is, well, why is that the case? Because of things like this. They give the perception that the elections are totally unfair. So therefore, the point goes beyond just the court case and saying, well, actually, if the WEC as the body that oversees the election aren't even following their own rules and they're not following legal advice, then no one's going to think the elections are fair at all. It's just a daft idea to assume that people just say, oh, it doesn't matter that people that ran the election broke the law. It's obviously going to impact people's views on the integrity of the election. This whole idea of election integrity. The Wisconsin Supreme Court can uphold elections by examining the procedures for which a complaint was made here and explaining or whether the WEC was correct and why it was not. Now, this is really important. I am also concerned that the public will misunderstand what a denial of the petition means. Occasionally, members of the public seem to believe that denial of our acceptance of a case means that the petition's allegations are either false or not serious. Nothing could be further from the truth. So this idea that because Trump lost this case, he was wrong, they're actually in the court case saying that our belief, they're not even saying that belief's wrong, but our belief in that view is incorrect. That's a kind of big wow issue there. So simply the people who ran the election gave advice to clerks who actually the advice wasn't even incorrect, it was opposite of state law. So they advised clerks to send in valid ballots back illegally, and this is what we'll see. There's lots of issues with not that the votes were tallied up wrong, it's the process and system of the votes was wrong. And in this case, it clearly was wrong. I mean, there's nothing that can be denied about that. Again, it's not being pro or anti-Trump, pro or anti-Republican. It's just finding out what the rules are. It's finding out the truth of whether those rules were broken or not. So this is the issue with these ballots, which we'll go into at some point. So this is a dissenting judge opinion, which we kind of covered already. So he says, or they say, I actually don't know if it's a man or a woman, that's a bit sexist, isn't it, Tim? So the Wisconsin Supreme Court forsakes its duty to the people of Wisconsin in declaring to decide whether election officials complied with Wisconsin's election laws in administering the November 2020 election. Instead, a majority of this court passively permits the Wisconsin Elections Commission to decree its own election rules, thereby overriding the will of the people as expressed in the election laws enacted by the people's elected representatives. It's this whole idea of for the people, by the people. Allowing 6 unelected commissioners to make law governing elections without the consent of the governed deals a death blow to democracy. I dissent. That's always how they end. I dissent if they dissent. That's another wow moment. So let's just go through the implications of what they're actually saying. So it's like, who makes up the rules? We do. What are the rules? These are. Did they break them? Yes. So what are we doing about it? Nothing. Well, we're doing nothing about them breaking the rules. So this would be my point, actually. They, as an institution or a group, are there to make sure the rules are abided by, and they actually did the opposite. So the point goes beyond this case and beyond the fairness of elections and what people think. Is like, well, actually, is this going to happen again in Wisconsin? Well, unless you change something based on this case, i.e. if you go back to the WC and worked out what they did, why they did it, and how to stop it again, it's going to happen again. So it's this whole point of who governs who, and this judge, by dissenting, is saying, well, it's not doing, these are my words, not responding to just the legal matters. We are effectively allowing them to make up the rules, not us. And where does the power legally reside? It's our responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. But we're actually allowing that to happen. So, next snippet. So in some other, you'll see the background, that's just the actual copy. That's for slide use for me. So that's a copy of print that I manually put into the slide for various reasons, which I won't go into. So understand next bit. The majority takes a pass on resolving the important questions presented by the petitions in this case, therefore undermine public's confidence on the integrity of the Wisconsin electoral processes, not only during this election but in every future election, which we just said. Alarmingly, the court's inaction also signals that the WCM may continue to administer elections in whatever manner it chooses, and that the court has repeatedly declined to scrutinise its conduct. My voice is going a bit. I'm not used to speaking this much, so sorry if that's the case, but I can't do anything about it. Regardless of whether the WC's actions affect election outcomes, the integrity of every election will be tarnished by the public's mistrust until the Wisconsin Supreme Court accepts its responsibility to declare what the election law says. Only the Supreme Court can provide the necessary clarity to guide all elections. A point about the majority's recent pattern of deferring altogether dodgy decisions on election or controversies cannot be reconciled with a lengthy history of property hearing cases involving voting rights and election processes under the court's original jurisdiction or bypassing the Court of Appeals. Well, the United States Supreme Court has recognised that a state indisputably has a compelling interest in preserving the integrity of the election process. Again, we discussed this earlier. What's the precedent? That's the precedent. The case that's being quoted. The majority of this court repeatedly demonstrates a lack of an interest in doing so, offering purely discretionary excuses or no reasoning at all. This is the year the majority in Hawkins versus WC declined to hear a claim that the WC unlawfully kept the Green Party's candidates for President and Vice President on the ballot, ostensibly because the majority felt the candidates' claims were brought too late. So this is a repeated issue. So it's not even about breaking the law or even whether that breaking the law is moral or immoral. It's just like you brought your case too late. Sorry. But when litigants have filed cases involving free rights while advancing Wisconsin elections, the court has taken a pass. So that the court can decide because of the legal rules, and they are rules. So you could say, are they to be adhered to? Well, in one case, the left would agree with that and the right would disagree. It's just the way it is. But the decision on a lot of these cases are because of timing, not because of the laws. It's too late. So it goes back to the issue we talked about. The Electoral Committee it's the legal mechanism to elect a president. Once that's been decided, it can't be undecided. Effectively, after that, even if something comes up, it's too late. So what we're saying? So there's this issue here with voting rights. So we'll hear it again, and we'll cover this. So we're not going to just skip these issues, but these issues aren't central to these particular issues, which is why we're skipping them for now. We will deal with them at some point. It's this whole idea of left versus right, which is, they call it different things, but it's effectively, on the left you have the rights of the voters, and then on the right you have the idea of upholding election integrity. So the point that's been made here is effectively you're dismissing the case because of these issues, but these same issues, when it comes to voting rights, have left issues, you're quite happy to hear. Obviously, there's a discombobulation, so to speak. One and one don't make two. So what is good for left is not what's good for right. What bad's for right is not necessarily what's bad for left. So it's not equal. That's what they're saying. The consequence of the majority operating by whim rather than rule is to leave the interpretation of multiple election laws in flux, or worse yet, in the hands of the unelected members of the WC. We kind of covered that. That's nice flowery language. Thank you for whoever wrote that. To be free is to live under government by law. Miserable is the condition of individuals. Danger is the condition of the state. There is no certain law which is the same thing. No certain administration law. Again, it's quoting a previous case. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has an institutional responsibility to decide important questions of law, not for the benefit of particular litigants, but for the citizens we were elected to serve. Justice for the people of Wisconsin means ensuring the integrity of Wisconsin's elections. The majority of this court disregards its duty to the people of Wisconsin, denying them justice. So that's all to do with that. So I think we've got 3 court cases. It might be a case we've actually got 2. So this is another one. So this is what I call pre-election shenanigans. So to be politically neutral, I've decided where I find something is not effectively what you might call correct or right, I've called it shenanigans. So shenanigans is kind of sort of saying something went wrong, we're not going to blame anyone, but someone is definitely to blame. It's for you to decide, not for me. So this is pre-election. We'll see. So it's right before the election. So it's not to do with Trump. So you'll hear this a lot. You'll hear something. Well, actually, you won't hear a lot because the news are simply not reporting it. What you hear, if you hear anything, is to do with certain counties. So this is the way it works. We have the various states within America. I don't even know how many there are. 50 or something like that. My excuses, but within the states you have counties. So this is a case that relates to a particular county. So you'd say Dane County. Well, what is that? So in England, it's a bit like if you see it's difficult to translate because America's such a bigger country, but where you hear county, it's part of a state. So the particular states hold their own particular voting. So the state of Dane County is responsible for its own election within its own county. That's just the way it works. And then you've got people obviously responsible, like they're responsible on a more state or even national level as official representatives. So you've got a county here, and you've got a guy called Scott McDonnell, whoever he is. Don't harass him, please, whatever you do on any social networks. This is why we have court cases. So he was the Dane County clerk, so that's his responsibility. So that's the case. So respondents lack the authority to issue an interpretation of Wisconsin's election law, allowing all elections in Dane County to obtain an absentee ballot without a photo identification. So this is a separate issue. So we're not going to discuss it, but I will briefly outlay what is going on here. So this completely confuses the whole election process, and you have to understand the confusion that brings, process, and then confusion that brings to whether a particular action within a state was legal or not because the law's been changed. So this is how it works. I'll briefly go over this. If you've got any questions, we will go over it later. But as I said at the start, we're looking at just what happens in the court case. So I'm going over this briefly just because it's been discussed. So presidential vote, election vote, state level, state laws, spoken about counties and where they come in. So the laws differ state to state, but most of the time, depending on whether a state is very left or right or in between, depending on that. But generally speaking, the rules are very strict. So coming into this election, the rules on absentee ballots are strict. So the issue then becomes, and we're going to fully look at this because it's just an absolute minefield. I don't think anyone really understands the consequences of what's going on or how crazy this whole issue was. So we have COVID. What then we have is a public health crisis, a pandemic in an election, which means, legally speaking, hardly anyone who doesn't want to sit in a queue within the pandemic is going to be able to vote. So there's all these petitions to court cases, to courts, to change the law temporarily. So this is what happens. Generally speaking, depending on the state, the law gets altered somewhat to allow for absentee ballot voting temporarily because there's a pandemic. So all these court cases are being going on pre-election in various states, and they'll be not just, I have to be honest here, I'll be as honest as I can be, they're not just pro-Democrat if you're in a Democrat state, they're not just pro-Republican if you're in a Republican state. So this is the issue. You have let's take the example of the Republicans. You have a Republican state with Republican officials, you have a pandemic, and then you have people saying, I know, because we have a pandemic and we've got all this stuff going on and the rules have changed, let's legally petition the state government to change the law to our benefit and make use of this. So you've got those shenanigans going on. Then with Democrat states, you've got the same issue. Now, being honest, what the issue is if the state laws are strict and the Democrats bring a claim within the state, making it more accessible for anyone to vote by absentee ballot when otherwise they wouldn't legally be allowed to. So again, the laws changed. So what honestly appears to be happening in my eyes, as far as I can see, and someone can tell me I'm wrong, is that change in itself, the fact that the laws are quite strict and that no one's going to be able to vote because it's a pandemic, are for the benefit of the Democrats. Point one. Point two, what do the Democrats do? They pretty much launch legal campaign after legal campaign after legal court case after legal court case, trying to basically dilute the laws to their advantage. To the point it's almost embarrassing. To the point in some of the court cases I've seen, the Democrats are saying, why don't we just make it so anyone can vote? They could just postal vote. What should the law be for those postal votes in this temporary situation? Why don't we just have no laws? That didn't happen often, but did happen in some cases. And the shenanigans brought by the Democrats, those Democrat shenanigans in that case, are quite, what's a good phrase to use here? They're basically hazy. It's like a fog. And what I mean by that is this is the point. This is my opinion. Might not be right, but actually you can go back to the facts and you can see all the court cases. You can see who brought a court case and you can see what they brought. And actually, this is the conclusion I've come to by doing that. So you have various official bodies representing Democrats. You have various official bodies that aren't political bodies petitioning on behalf of Democrats. Then you have individuals petitioning on behalf of Democrats. Then you have some of those individuals being these high-powered people that work within these high-powered organizations that aren't officially Democrats. So you've got Democrats officially petitioning court cases to relax the rules, and then you've got other people doing it officially on behalf of Democrats. Then you've got anyone doing it on behalf of Democrats if they want to do it. So you have this bombardment of these election rules. And really this is an example of how in this situation the pandemic was used to basically, what I'd say, manipulate the circumstances by Democrats for Democrat benefit to get Joe Biden in and to get Trump removed. So the issue, the grander issue is, and this is quite a big issue, which is why we're discussing it, is what changes when there's a pandemic. Because naturally, no one's going to really want to vote. Or certainly, you could say for absolute certainty, because America's now in a pandemic, people feel vulnerable aren't necessarily going to vote, and they're going to be refused their rights to vote. Now, what do you do about that? I'd say you have to do something about that. In some extent, I'd say what they did about it was entirely correct. I'd even go as far as saying they could have gone further, morally speaking, but also morally speaking, I know they went too far, and certainly the Democrats went too far in trying to change the rules for whatever they want. And this is the whole point. Whenever we see an example of this, it's always a Democrat. It's never a Republican. So there's a whole counter argument about stuff like this to do it. It's basically nonsense. So if you hear it in this context, this is basically the point, that the pandemic, because it's a pandemic, changes everything. So what do they do about that? They have to change the law. What do they do to make sure that election integrity is as integral as it's been before? Because the rules have been relaxed, they do nothing. I think that's more a case of learning the lesson in case this happens again in terms of an election in a pandemic. But anyway, this is the issue. So that this guy is official capacity in this particular, let's go back, Dane County in Wisconsin. So because there's a pandemic, this is the background we just discussed, that the rules have been relaxed and people who would otherwise not be able to vote can vote. So let's just read it. So he let the authority, so we'll just refer to it, respondent. So that's this guy, Scott. So Scott lacked the authority to issue an interpretation of Wisconsin's election law allowing all electors in Dane County to obtain an absentee ballot without a photo identification. So the presumption there is these are the rules. These have been relaxed. What were the rules? There are rules around absentee ballots, and the rules within that about photo identification. So one of the things clearly is done in this case, because this is what happened, is those rules to do with identification were basically the rules to do with photo identification were active within this election, like to some extent they didn't exist, they weren't laws at all. So it's like, oh no, you don't need any photo identification. There is a global pandemic going on. If you do not want to vote, just put one in a post. It's fine. And it's kind of, it's obviously not as trivial as that. There's more to it, but most of the time it is as trivial as that. So there's an emergency order. So this has to generally be done by the governor. No? So they create this emergency order. So this is basically what's happened. So recap. In a global pandemic, no one who wants to vote can vote. they changed the rules, naturally speaking, they should. So this Governor Evers, creates this emergency order number 12, it's quoted there, that, and within that order, did not authorise all Wisconsin voters to obtain an absentee ballot without photo identification. So basically what we're saying is, the rules have to be changed. The rules that were changed weren't changed so that everyone can vote an absentee ballot without a photo identification. So again, this guy is basically communicating that you can do something which actually is against the rules. So this is kind of the rules about what that means. So the terms used is indefinitely confined. So we're getting to legal aids here. So let me just briefly explain. Normally, in a normal election, so the same things apply. For any reason, and you can imagine someone not particularly healthy, if you wanted to vote and you couldn't, you're effectively what they call indefinitely confined. So you can't vote. So there therefore has to be a system where you can vote, which has to be what is called absentee ballot voting or postal voting. So obviously there has to be a system in place for that to happen, and that system has its own laws regarding voter ID. These were all set up. So actually, when the law was changed by this emergency order, some of those issues were not changed. Like if you could now mark yourself as indefinitely confined because of the pandemic, though that's not the case. So legally, that's fine. Morally, there are still some question marks about that, but that's just a moral question mark. We're just looking at the evidence and the legal evidence. What you need to do if you do that is you still need to have voter ID. That law hasn't changed, and this guy, who's an official, is saying just don't need voter ID. So, and then elected determination. This is the determination that they're indefinitely confined. It's based on age, physical illness, or infirmity. An elector is indefinitely confined for his or her own age, physical illness, or infirmity, not those of another person. So this is another sub-issue. You have groups of people wanting to vote in the same way. So because you're a carer now, this is another issue which has kind of popped up. Because you're a carer of someone who's indefinitely confined does not mean that you're indefinitely confined by the law. Again, legally within this election, unless that law has changed. And again, that's something that Democrats may have wanted to petition particular states to change to allow more people who would vote Democrat to vote Democrat. So this is what they find. Accordingly, we conclude that the respondents, this is the Scott guy, interpretation of Wisconsin election laws was erroneous. Additionally, we conclude that Emergency Order 12 did not render all Wisconsin electors indefinitely confined, thereby obviating the requirement of valid voter identification to obtain absentee ballot. So basically, if we don't understand that, what would I say is the best way to explain? We had some official, just happens to be a Democrat, in a Democrat county, just stating you can vote when actually what he's stating is not legally correct. So again, was the law broken? Yes, it was. And that's just some bits. So if you want to, well, I think we've gone through this. Let's not repeat ourselves. So additionally, we conclude that Emergency Order 12 did not render all Wisconsin electors definitely confined, thereby obviating the requirement of a valid voter identification to absentee ballot. So he's saying you don't need it, when actually the point is you still do. So the law's been changed to allow that to happen, absentee balloting, but the law about what you need to do for absentee balloting hasn't been changed. So that is what it is that happened. It gets a bit damning, I think, if I'm being honest from here on. So how did how does this Dane County clerk communicate this? By communicating on his own personal Facebook page. Sounds a bit like, I know what, I'll break the, like, I'll just announce this. I'll put it on my own personal Facebook page. Hey guys, you can just go and vote. Don't worry about voter ID. So, on March 25th, this is what he posted. It's basically the proof that what's said in the court case is actually what he said. You can read it if you want. I'm not going to run through it. But basically it's this quote from his Facebook page, the end of the first paragraph, where he says, I urge all voters who request a ballot and have trouble presenting a valid ID to indicate they are indefinitely confined. People are reluctant to check the box that says they are indefinitely confined, but this pandemic, speech on law is here to help preserve it in front of the phone. He's actually not only stating you can do something you can't legally do, but he's stating it's within the law when actually he's breaking the law. This is just some things in the court case that I think. So you can read them, because this is what I think. But this is basically my whole argument. It's like if you're going to be mistaken to do that officially in an official capacity, you would do it through official communication methods. This guy's using his own Facebook page. I think that's quite damning. So this is the process. So I have to request a ballot. Ballot gets sent, and then I certify that I'm indefinitely confined due to AG on this or something. But then the voter is able to skip the step of uploading an ID in order to receive a ballot for the election. But actually in the legal process, that's not what they're supposed to do. Voters who are able to provide a copy of the ID should do so and not indicate they are indefinitely confined. So that breaks all the rules that have been changed, which is the confusion. If the rules are being temporarily changed, so the rules that did apply now don't apply, then can we just bend that a bit and make a few more rules of our own? So that's the actual guidance. Again, previous court case, they didn't follow their own guidance on something different. This is the actual guidance that proves. So this is again in the court case that he wrote the law. And I'm not going to read it because it's just quoting there. And as I've already said, we've already said in the court case that they've said he was incorrect. He shouldn't have done that. So he broke this guideline. So back to Donald Trump. So this is the last of our three. So this is a review of the case, I think, or part of the case. It doesn't matter because it's still a legal document. It's about those four issues. So it dives a bit more, whether it's one or the other, on what those four issues are and if Trump's right, they wrote them. So the first challenge, Wisconsin law provides that a written application is required before voters can receive an absentee ballot, and that any absentee ballot issued with an application cannot be counted. The campaign, that's the Trump campaign, argues that all in-person absentee votes in Dane and Milwaukee, so two counties, were cast without the required application. So they basically wrote the law in counting. Second category of ballots challenged are those with certificates containing witness address information added by a municipal clerk. I mean, that just sounds dodgy to start off with. Why are people who are officiating in elections adding information to ballots? See, I'm British, I'm not American, but I would think, and by saying I think, I'm pretty sure I'm right, that to do anything as a official administrator in any capacity in an election other than touch the ballot should be a legal offence. It either is a legal offence or it should be. There's no two ways about that. But actually, changing the information on the ballot, doing anything, that clearly is a whole Pandora's box, which we won't go into. So, second counter-ballots exchanged are those with certificates containing witness address information added by a municipal court. We've covered that. Absentee ballots must be witnessed, and the witness must provide their name, signature, and address on the certification on the backside of the envelope in which the absentee ballot is ultimately sealed. Again, through the whole election, you have this issue of these type of ballots having missing information and whether they're counted, and whether some of them shouldn't be counted because they missed certain information. And then what context if they missed certain information, whether it be the name, signature, and address, which they should have put because there's a space on it, whether legally they should have been counted and then they can't. And then again, as we've already said, if those ballots shouldn't have been counted and they were, there's no way to reverse engineer taking them away from the ballot count. Well, a witness address must be provided on certification for the corresponding ballot to be counted. The statute is silent as to what portion of address the witness must provide. This is part of the issue, actually. It's got nothing to do with what's right or wrong. It's to do with the law actually doesn't say what should and shouldn't be on the portion of address the witness must provide. Therefore, it's to the interpretation of the person who is in official capacity looking at that going, I think that's valid, or I don't think that's not valid. And again, how is that decided? It's decided on, I would say, political preference. It's not actually decided at all. I mean, this is my point. This is the question. This is the real point. When you're an official administrator and you decide what should and shouldn't be counted, how do you do that? Well, for example, I might assume, if that was me, the signature's fine. Then someone else might say, no, it's not fine, all three need to be. 3 pieces of information need to be on the ballot, the name, signature, and address. And then someone might say, well, someone might take a middle view saying 2 out of 3 is fine. That's just a view, but actually, it's the reality then, whenever I preferably pick out the 3 versions, I apply to all the ballots, whether they vote Democrat or Republican. I actually would say, from what I've seen, the evidence would suggest that's certainly not the case in all circumstances. Actually, people decided one thing depending on the voted Democrat and another thing for Republican. And I'm actually not saying that would just have happened if that person was Democrat leaning. I'm also saying that would probably happen if the person was Republican leaning candidates to some extent. From the information I've seen, that needs to be investigated. And we'll look at other evidence issues further down the line as to why that would be the case. But the problem there is the law. So rather than having that ambiguity, allowing that potentially someone who's a Republican to manipulate the count by just allowing that for Republican voters and not for Democrats, you don't create that interpretation and there's no loophole. So that can't happen. And if it happens, you break in the rules and the guidelines, but then might tell me, you need to enforce the rules and the guidelines, don't you, Timothy? Yes, you do. And did they do that? No, they didn't. Not in Wisconsin. To a certain extent, with the WEC. In this case, now before us, a significant portion of the public does not believe that the November 3rd presidential election was fairly conducted, and we discussed it. And why? Because it wasn't. Once again, for Justice Scott cannot. I mean, this is quite damning. This is again the same thing. Someone's I can't remember what's it called. Dissenting. They're dissenting. They're disagreeing with the majority decision, so they get to state it on the court case. Once again, 4 justices of the court cannot be bothered with addressing what the statutes require to ensure that absentee ballots are lawfully cast. I respectfully dissent from that decision. I rise separately to address the merits of the claim presented. The Milwaukee County Board of Kansas and Dane County Board of Kansas based their decisions on erroneous voice when they concluded that changes clerks made to defective witness addresses were permissible. And the Dane County Board of Kansas erred again when it approved the 200 locations for ballot collection that comprised democracy in the park. This is a separate issue in the case. So we said there were 4. I think this is the third that's brought up. So again, they broke the law. I think we talk about this a bit more. I have looked at it enough to know what it is to state what the facts in the case were. We'll wait and see. It's been a while since I looked at the slides. The ballot collection that comprised democracy in the park, this may well be it. The majority does not bother addressing what the board or councillors did or should have done. Instead, 4 members of this court for the cloak of laches. So laches is a legal term basically meaning the time is run out. Over numerous problems that will be repeated again and again, so this court has the courage to correct them. So I would think from my perspective, and this is just me talking, the worst case scenario of that opinion is, in this case, because whatever laches or time, we're going to fine for the defendant or husband, but we're also going to action these issues to make sure these don't happen again. I think that's the least I would expect. Has that happened? No. The electorate expects more of us, and I've cut that off because that's not important. So not everything in the court case is there. Just the highlights for me of the information. Again, you can go and find it and look for yourself. If WEC has been given advice contrary to statute, those acts do not make the advice lawful. The WEC must follow the law. Where's the law declaring court? Oh, it's the public to declare what the WEC's advice is to how it does not necessarily lead to striking absentee ballots and will cause by following incorrect WEC advice. The remedy petitioners may seek may be outraged for a number of reasons. So we might have stated that before. Cases granted by Wisconsin, which, according to the plain language of certain rules, so 6.87 brackets 2 requires that it is the witness who must affix his or her signature and write in his or her name and address. So this goes back to what we were talking about with filling out information. The section does not mention any election official taking any action. So to clarify, it doesn't really it's the person voting who must put the information, not the person who's administrating. Again, that sounds absurd to me. So you could say it doesn't state that the person administrating can't do that. Well, it kind of does because it says it has to be the person voting. If you're not the voter, then you can't do that. The statutes explain what an official may do if an absentee ballot is received when improperly completed. The clerk may return the ballot to the elector, sign the seal of the envelope when an envelope is received, together with the new envelope. If necessary, whenever time permits, the elector to correct the defect, return the ballot within the period authorised. So something we haven't brought up, which hasn't come up, is this whole idea of count the votes. We won't say anything like that, but you can see how that can be manipulated by people who are doing this, sending the ballots back when they shouldn't be sending the ballots back, and stepping outside the law in doing so. And suddenly you've got this lag of voting. Why have you got ballots coming back late anyway? And are they legally late? So, can of worms. It is a real can of worms. Anyway, that's something we might possibly discuss at some point. Anyway, in this case, again, in each state it's different. So what you can't have is count all the votes the same way, exactly the same in every state, because the rules are different. The clerk may return the ballot, so I think we've read that. So that's what they're permitted to do, the officials, the WEC officials, the clerks. Plain language authorizes election officials to return the ballot to the elector to correct the defect. It does not authorize election officials to make the corrections. So they made the corrections, they weren't legally allowed. So legally speaking, should those ballots have been counted? No. Can we take them off? No. Because of what we said already about retro, respectively, going back and changing the result when you don't know how many ballots were affected. In addition, the statute provides that if a certificate is missing, the address for witness ballot may not be counted. The language is clear. So actually in this case it's saying, so we went through those different scenarios with different pieces of information. Here they're saying that in this case that the laws are clear, and the law is clear that the ballot cannot be counted. Furthermore, subsection whatever, Marian prepared by this campus that act requires an absentee ballot to have a witness address to be counted. An absentee ballot voter must complete the certification and sign a certification in the presence of a witness, and the witness must sign the certificate and provide his or her name and address. So more than that, actually, when you're doing that absentee balloting, again, the issue is people who can't naturally absentee ballot now can, because there's a pandemic. The rules are temporarily relaxed. The rules about how if you vote that when you're legally allowed to, what you do have not been relaxed. So not only must they fill out all the 3 different parts of the vote about who's voting, but they need to fill it out and vote with a witness who also must provide an address. The contention that the ballots with defective addresses cannot be counted is supported more than the plain meaning of Wisconsin. So they're saying, right, these defective addresses, because they don't have an address on them, cannot be counted. So that's actually supported in the law. Oh my goodness. I've forgotten a lot of this stuff. The requirement that such ballots not be counted is found here, which provides that the provisions are mandatory. Look, notwithstanding the plain, clear requirements of 2 statutes, WEC's guidance explicitly directs municipal clerks that they must take corrective action in an attempt to remedy a witness error. WEC guidance states that municipal clerks should do all they can reasonably to obtain any missing part of the witness address. In addition, the WEC instructs clerks to add witness address information, even though the guidance acknowledges that some clerks have expressed. So actually, the guidance within the WEC is actually illegal. So we discussed it before. You have issues about the way the election was conducted. Those issues relate to the people conducting the election, the officials. That then goes to a court case. The court case is thrown out because of time issues. That does not change the fact of the facts, which is the fact is that they should not have done that in the first place. Unless you do something to change that will happen in the future. But actually, the whole problem is their own internal guidance actually broke the law. So the way that the whole administration was set up was effectively illegal, certainly within the constraints of what we discussed. In addition to WEC instructs clients to add witness address information, even though the guidance acknowledges that some clients have expressed concern about altering information on the certificate, especially in the case of a recount. But they should be concerned, because either the law's the law or it's not. Despite the law, the fact you do or you don't, we've already discussed this. The only thing they should be doing is handling and counting the vote, if they're counting it manually, or doing whatever they need to count it automatically. They shouldn't be doing anything else with the piece of paper. They certainly should not be correcting anything or writing anything on the bits of paper. In my mind, not even officially to say this has been counted. Because you then change the ballot. So it's no wonder people express concern. Because morally speaking, why are we running an election and we're like doing stuff on ballots? That doesn't sound right. My conclusion that errors in the certification of absentee ballots required discarding these ballots is consistent with our precedent. Absentee ballots were returned to municipal clerk without bearing a notary signature on the accompanying certificate envelope as required by statute at the time. The clerk added her signature to the certificates. Wow. I mean, how damning, I mean, I'm trying to be neutral, but how damning is that? Someone sent a ballot, they've done it incorrectly, it's illegal. I know, I'm going to sign my own signature. Do they sign their signatures? Do they sign the person's signature? I mean, there's filling out the ballot, there's being obviously morally incorrect, and then there's the point of signing on behalf of a voter being morally bankrupt. That's just my opinion, but like, clearly a signature is a signature, and it's a signature for a signature because it serves a purpose, particular purpose, which is this is me, this is who I am, this is my signature. Clearly, if someone else is signing that, that's not the case. At least you think so. Anyway, we explained that the elector's failure to ensure the certification complied with the statute validated the ballots. Additionally, we stated the fact that the clerk further complicated the matter by signing her name to the it cannot aid the voter. The two wrongs cannot make a right. The ballots were not counted. In the case at hand, a defective witness address must be corrected by a clerk, just as the signature of notary could not be. Right, in the case at hand, a defective witness cannot be corrected by a clerk, just as the signature on the notary cannot be corrected by the clerk in Kaufman. So that's the previous case, which is third line, Kaufman versus whoever there. So that's the precedent. The precedent in this state, Wisconsin, aren't we? I get mixed up sometimes, is they shouldn't have done that. In something, again, precedent court case, back from 1960s, absentee ballots were issued without the municipal clerk's initials or signature as required by statute at that time. We concluded that the ballots should not have been counted. Furthermore, we stated that the statute that obligated the invalidation of these ballots survived the Constitution. We emphasised that absentee ballot voting is subject to different statutory requirements than for voting in a polling place. While a ballot cast at the polling place without initials or signature may be countable. So again, this is why there's some confusion. Why is that the case? That to me sounds a bit daft. An absentee ballot subject to an analogous defect is not. But I think this is my opinion on this, and my opinion will differ from most Americans. But this is the system we have. It's very strict. It's very regimented. There's not much you can do. It's very simple. If you do anything wrong, discounted. So some ways it's strict, but it works. It's very clear, very black and white what you can and you can't do. And to me, as someone who's not American, it's not the case. Even within a state, if you lived in that state all your life and got used to the laws of that state, you haven't had to change. Flown to another state, moved housing, and had completely different voting laws or some different laws. It's like, this is not a simple process. As we stated clearly, administrative agencies including WC often treat their guidance as if it were law, but that does not make it so. Such treatment is inappropriate. It confuses people by making them think they have a legally cognizable reliance interest in WC's guidance when they do not. I think we've spoken about this. Let's just read it again, because I'm going to have to read it while I'm recording. This is about indefinitely confined. Provides the statute manner by which some electors may obtain absentee ballots of the mode outlined above. Those who are indefinitely confined because of age, infirmity, physical illness, or disabled for an indefinite period may apply for an absentee ballot on the basis. Those electors are then excused from the absentee ballot photo identification requirement. So again, this muddies the laws. There are exceptions. So that's the exception. So to recap, pandemic changes that. Then it is this is the whole point. There's this grey area where you're allowed to do these things, but you're not really. And it's how those grey areas were exploited deliberately, to me, that is the chief area of concern. Because it's natural if there are grey areas, they're going to appear naturally. But then we've already touched on the fact, or we'll touch on this properly later, are then certain political people seeing this as an opportunity to actually manipulate ballots to get the election that they want to get? That's a question actually we can't answer at the moment because we're only looking at Wisconsin. In the pending matter, we do not have sufficient information about the 28,395 absentee voters who claim this status in walking down Katie to determine whether they lawfully asserted that they were definitely confined prior to receiving absentee. Goes to what we're saying. These are kind of the votes that were affected. We don't know how many of them actually were affected. Therefore, we can't jig their account to take into consideration the correcting of the count because we don't know who didn't do what out of those. Therefore, I go no further interest in this. There's really nothing you can do considering this is the problem Trump's got, which is the whole argument of evidence, no evidence. Clearly, no evidence is. But we've got Bailey in, and it's the case of not. Rather than being the case that there is no evidence, as the media outlets have reported, there's the case that actually there's quite a lot of evidence in this case anyway, and that the evidence is breaking a law. The evidence is quite damning, and more than anything is damning not even on the election, it's damning on the media's reporting of what Trump did, because as we said, no evidence. The one thing you can't say is there is no evidence. So either they looked, or they deliberately chose not to look, or they looked and deliberately chose not to report. So it's one of the three. When you have a case where everyone's reporting the same thing, I'm like, do I believe that? Again, it's just my opinion. I don't. The odds don't favour being innocent in terms of the news media being derelict in duty of actually reporting the facts of the news, because they reported the opposite. And again, you ask, is that because they chose not to look? Is that because they did know, they just didn't report on it? They just reported on what they wanted to report on, which wasn't reporting. It's just, it's kind of, to me, it goes beyond puzzling. It goes to the point of who makes these choices in these organisations and why? Because it's not based on what they're telling us that they're doing, which is presenting the news factually. So this is the democracy in the park. So this is an event. So I did a bit of research into this. I don't really present to you. You can go find out. So someone came up with this great idea of, helping people to vote. And again, it comes across as, you look at Democrats. We're just going to do naturally what Democrats try and do within the law, which is to try and get people to vote as much as they can. To create an awareness of voting, to create to make it easy for people to vote, because they know people that otherwise don't would have generally voted Democrat. That's why they do these things. That's all inside the law. That's one thing, this is another. So they organised this event. Let's just go through the details in the course. So on these dates, so it's close to election, and more than 200 city of Madison parks. There's a lot of parks, a lot of organisation. So this just wasn't some thing they just kind of dreamed up and then easily organised. So they called it Democracy in the Park. So during those events, poll workers also referred as election inspectors helped in the completion of ballot envelopes, acted as witnesses for voters and completed ballots. So we've already seen why they have to do that, because it's absentee voting. I mean, I've not even thought of this before, but this is the irony. We said this many times, but we'll say, we have a pandemic, and we said this many times, in a pandemic, people naturally don't want to vote for obvious reasons. You go to big events like Democracy in a Park, and there are going to be people there with COVID. You don't want to do that. So there's the ability to absentee votes. So what do? They create an event where people with COVID can mix with people who are not COVID. It's like all the stuff the Democrats have said, not about elections, but about COVID. And we've just had the Biden vaccine mandates that you must have the vaccine or you can't do ABC, various circumstances. Government officials, it's really tough. We've seen some NBA players not being able to play because they won't take the vaccine. We've seen some health workers basically being escorted out of their workplaces because they refused to have the vaccine. So they're pretty tough. You can argue about that, but like they're in the election organising these results that, quite frankly, are spreading COVID. So the point of them being able to do this is negated by what they're actually doing. It's like it's crazy. It's reckless for a start. So they collected 17,271 absentee ballots. So this is the issue. The poll workers and staff this Democracy in the Park were volunteers. They were not employees of the City Madison Clerk's office. So this is the thing about witnessing the ballots. Legally, they weren't legally in the capacity to actually do what they did. So all those ballots, kaput, legally invalid. So this is the point. The statute requires that when voting on an absentee ballot, the envelope containing the ballot should be mailed by the elector or delivered in person to the municipal clerk issuing the ballot or ballots. In addition, the plain words of the statute specifically direct the provisions in the statute should be construed as mandatory. In order to turn the use of shall, the mandatory requirement to comply with the terms, the 17,200 ballots that were collected in Madison Park did not comply with the statute. Stated otherwise, they were not delivered in person to the municipal clerk. So, that's just officially recapping what. So those 2,071 ballots that were again counted as valid votes shouldn't have been counted legally. Again, retrospectively, how do you take them out? There is no process for doing that. So the point always comes back to this. They didn't defend the process by weakening the laws, and they should have done. Did the Democrats abuse that, take advantage of that? To some extent, yes. To other extents, you can argue maybe they did more, maybe they didn't do more. I think, to me, the evidence I'm all finding says they did more than that. I won't say anything else. We'll look at that evidence when we look at it. That's probably the best thing to say. What should be happening across America right now? We're almost a year from the election. When this happened, how do we stop it happening again in the same circumstance? So clearly, when those ballots were counted, they should have been separated and not mixed in with all the other ballots, like they are just any other ballot, because as we're saying, they're not any other ballot. This isn't any other election. This is kind of common sense to me. This isn't any other election. So what someone should have done in each state and in each county, each place of voting, is, well, this isn't any other election. We're going to forethink what issues we're going to have in terms of ballots and voting, and we're going to separate the ballots, and if there's a problem, we can then take them in and out. That clearly didn't happen, and it should have done. Clearly today someone needs to do the same, and it clearly hasn't been done. And then clearly there are political issues when people are trying to do that and try to firm up the law. Particularly, I mean, go away and research this about states changing election laws and then being racist. Now, The being racist is something entirely different we won't go into. But clearly from what we've seen already, that there are issues in this election where retrospectively the safeguarding election did not happen to some extent. Whatever we think about it, whether we're left or right, we see rules were broken, there was no safeguarding despite the fact rules were changed. We can't retrospectively go back. So the racist issue is not here nor there. The real issue is, yeah, the states and the people that vote in those states and the powerful people may well be racist, but on the other side there are issues that need to be addressing. So it's clearly not as black and white as about just, oh, they're changing the law, they're racist. That clearly is not the case. So if that's clearly not the case, why are certain people, and they're all Democrats again, labelling people in states who are changing the law racist? If you have or haven't heard about it, go back to the last season's MLB, the Major League Baseball big game, when there was a whole political hurrah. Can't remember where it is. Georgia, I think it is. I could be mistaken. There's a whole political hurrah because people in Georgia were trying to change the law and they were doing what they were doing. Now, quite conceivably, they could have looked at what we've been looking at and said, that's not right, we have to do something about that. Now, they were labelled racist, and even Joe Biden called them racist. When you've got... I don't even know to comment on that Joe Biden. Just like watch the news for long enough and you'll realise. But clearly that's a problem when he's weighing in as president saying they're racist when clearly that may not be the case. That's like morally bankrupt as a president. And as about as morally bankrupt as the left consider anything Trump did. But it's pretty bad when the president labels you racist when the facts, as we see, not necessarily so. So the pressure that came out of that, and this is what we all said at the start, to some extent, what we need to discuss in this series, this is the point of the series, is that political pressure was put on the baseball people. You've got media adding to that, you've got social media. What happened? The game was cancelled because Georgia state officials are a bunch of racists. And it's just clearly not necessarily so. And the reality, if they are actually racist, then something needs to happen more than just to cancel a baseball game. But there you are. So anyway, that's a nice rant to leave on. So this has been a long video, almost 90 minutes. We have looked at the actual evidence. So 90 minutes long video, but there is actual evidence. So I think we've already started to answer our question definitively. Certainly in Wisconsin's case, is there actually any evidence? And that's what we're interested in doing, really, at the end of the day. The answer is yes. So what the media are up to, I have no idea. So up next, we've got Pennsylvania. Thanks for listening in. And for getting this long in the video, and might see you or might not in the next video where we'll cover Pennsylvania. For now, Bella ciao, Bella ciao, Bella. Ciao, ciao, ciao.